The vaccine doesn't prevent infection. It doesn't prevent transmission, and it's failing. Now they're going after our kids, Tim. I see advertisement now for down to 6 months old getting this COVID shot. And that's a mistake. That's a form of abuse, in my opinion. Children have an almost 0% risk of dying of COVID-19. So why would we inject them with an experimental product that has no long-term safety studies? And the signals for injury from these vaccinations are building. And it would be widespread if legacy media actually carried that information, but they don't. So instead, what they do is they pass laws like in California to shut down doctors that are voicing a difference of opinion, so they can just go on with their government narrative, which I believe is directly harming patients and is going to be a medical disaster if this bill is allowed to stand.
Well, welcome everybody to Our Watch. I am Tim Thompson, and I am blessed to be here today with a person that you probably already know, Dr. Jeff Barke. He's been a leader, and over the last few years, he's been one of those names that almost become a household name. Everybody knows who he is. Dr. Jeff Barke, thank you for joining us.
Tim, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to you about what's going on. First, before we get moving on, in case somebody doesn't know who you are, you want to just introduce yourself and what you've been doing over the last few years?
Sure. So I'm a board-certified primary care physician. I practice in coastal Orange County, and I've been very active over this whole COVID nonsense over the last 2 to 3 years. It started out by me being asked to speak at a rally in Riverside when the Riverside County Board of Supervisors were contemplating reopening Riverside at the beginning when everything was closed. And as a result of a 5-minute speech I gave that ultimately got posted on social media, I was contacted literally by media and patients and doctors from all over the world. And I realized what I was saying was resonating with people. And it was not just my voice. I was really representing the voice of hundreds, if not thousands, of physicians that were very frustrated by what they were seeing in the healthcare industry and in general, just the draconian and tyrannical shutdowns of our society during COVID. So I've become pretty active in the medical freedom fight, and that's really where we are now. And we're extending that fight now to suing the Medical Board of California and the Attorney General in California for a law Governor Newsom recently signed. That's Assembly Bill 2098. Myself and Dr. Mark McDonald are represented by Liberty Justice Center. And the bill basically says that before you can talk to a patient about anything related to COVID, you need to consider the government narrative about what they are saying and make sure that you don't do anything different. So the bill specifically, and I'm reading from it, talks about misinformation. And it says, quote, misinformation means false information that is contradicted by contemporary scientific consensus, contrary to the standard of care. Now, remember that the Medical Board of California, our licensing board, is appointed by the governor. About half those members are not even physicians, they're attorneys. The president of the medical board is an attorney. So those are the folks that are going to adjudicate whether what I'm saying is beyond the standard of care and misrepresenting something that they don't want me to say. So it really is a physician gag order. It prevents physicians from rendering opinions, first opinion or even second opinion, to their patients. And it's bad for patients. It's going to harm patients. And believe me, Tim, this is not going to be isolated to California. If we allow this to stand in California, it's going to spread like a disease across the country, and other states will pick it up, and it's going to directly harm patients. And that's why Dr. McDonald and I are fighting.
Yeah, we've watched over the last few years this type of action already kind of being carried out without that bill. We've seen the censorship of people like you, me, anybody else trying to get good, accurate information out. And it's been very difficult over the last few years. You, like I said, you've been a leader. You've been standing up for freedom and making sure that people have, like I said, good, solid information. But now we see with this law in place, and like you said, it could go across the rest of the nation. What do you think are going to be some of the immediate ramifications of this bill? How do you think this is going to impact our society right now?
Well, if the bill actually goes into effect, and it's supposed to January 1, 2023, I think what we'll see is physicians across California, especially activist physicians like me, being notified by the medical board that they're under investigation. And their effort will be to try to take licenses away from physicians like me. We already in California have a shortage of primary care doctors. We also have doctors that are leaving the state and moving to the usual places, Texas and Florida, Tennessee, et cetera. So it's going to directly affect patient care. Most importantly, though, is when I sit down with the patient and review, especially as it relates to COVID, I review the totality of their situation, their past history, their medical problems. We physically examine them. We review laboratory studies, et cetera. And then I give them my best opinion. It's an opinion. And this idea somehow that there's medical consensus is nonsense. The only reason why you have medical consensus is when dissenting physicians are silenced. And that's what's happening now. So on social media, my videos, et cetera, are blocked. And there appears to be this artificial consensus because dissenting opinions are censored. That's dangerous for patients. And the census and the consensus in medicine is ever evolving. I mean, it was only a few months ago that the CDC, told us that asymptomatic people should be tested, that there was asymptomatic spread. But in August, they updated their guidelines to say no longer do they recommend that asymptomatic people be tested. And that was the whole premise upon which our schools were closed. For example, we were told during the pandemic, when the schools were closed, that little Johnny, despite the fact that he feels well, potentially could harbor the virus, spread it to his friends, spread it to the teachers, and then they'd all go home and kill grandma and grandpa. Well, we didn't believe it at the time. I spoke out against that at the time. It's scientific fraud. And now the CDC is agreeing and saying, just kidding, you don't actually need to test people that have no symptoms. They also say you should treat vaccinated and unvaccinated people the same. Well, before these new guidelines came out in August, we were told the opposite, that if you weren't vaccinated, you need to be tested. You have to show proof before you go to a movie or a sporting event and so forth. And now they're saying, no, vaccinated and unvaccinated should be treated the same, meaning the vaccine doesn't prevent infection, it doesn't prevent transmission, and it's failing. Now they're going after our kids, Tim. I see advertisement now for down to 6 months old getting this COVID shot. And that's a mistake. That's a form of abuse, in my opinion. Children have an almost 0% risk of dying of COVID-19. So why would we inject them with an experimental product that has no long-term safety studies? And the signals for injury from these vaccinations are building. And it would be widespread if legacy media actually carried that information, but they don't. So instead, what they do is they pass laws like in California to shut down doctors that are voicing a difference of opinion, so they can just go on with their government narrative, which I believe is directly harming patients and is going to be a medical disaster if this bill is allowed to stand.
So, we look at this bill, and you guys are bringing this lawsuit out right now. That seems really fast. So let me ask you, were you anticipating this bill getting signed into law? Were you waiting to see if they actually did it and you were prepared? Because you guys are jumping on this quick.
Yeah, this bill has been brewing around in the state legislature for a while. Both houses both houses up in Sacramento passed it, and it was sitting on the governor's desk for about a month or so. So we were preparing. We were hopeful he would veto it. Obviously, he didn't, and he waited until the very last day, which was September, the end of September, very last day of the legislative session, and he signed it. So yes, we were prepared. Liberty Justice Center had reached out to us weeks prior to the signing and said, if they do sign it, we'd like to immediately file a lawsuit. We think it's that important. So Dr. McDonald and myself signed on with Liberty Justice Center. By the way, they're a pro bono law firm, meaning they don't charge us. They represent us for free. They get money directly from donations. So go on to libertyjusticecenter.org, throw a few coins in the tip jar, even if it's a small amount, every little bit helps. And we're fighting. It's an uphill battle. And if we need to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court, we will, because patient rights are directly being affected. This is going to harm patients and cause grave injury across the country if this bill passes.
Are there any initial thoughts from your attorneys about success? Like how successful they think this is going to be, your lawsuit against the state, against the so I'm sorry, and tell me, it's against the state and against the Attorney General?
We're suing the Medical Board of California and the Attorney General in federal court.
Okay.
So it's a federal lawsuit because it's a First Amendment violation. On paper, our attorneys are very confident because it's crystal clear that this law is bad law, un-American, and a constitutional violation. Of course, you just never know how a judge is going to rule. So the first step is our request for an injunction is before a federal judge. Now, it's a judge that was appointed by President Biden just a couple months ago. But we're confident that regardless of their political persuasion and who appointed them, that this is so obvious and so insidious that it's clear that this is a First Amendment violation. So we're hopeful that the judge will simply put an injunction on this bill and say, no, it can't go into effect, at least until it's gone through the court system and it's been properly heard. So that's what we're hoping for. If we don't get that, we will appeal it right on up. And ultimately, if need be, we'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
Outstanding. All right. Well, hey, we're going to follow this story. We want to watch how this proceeds, how you guys are successful. We're really looking forward to a success. A success for you means a success for all of us here in California. And like you said, even throughout the rest of the nation, because this, if we don't stop it now, it's going to affect our entire country. So thank you, Dr. Barke, for stepping up. We're going to continue to reach out to you to get updates, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Pastor Tim. I appreciate you, and thanks for giving us a voice.
All right. Anytime. God bless you.